Before we begin our journey tonight, if you find yourself drawn to these whispered tales of ancient magic and forgotten lore, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to Sleepy Sorcerer Stories. Your support helps us continue uncovering these enchanted secrets and bringing them to you in the stillness of the night. Now, settle in, let the world outside fade away, and join me as we step into a realm where time itself seems to hold its breath. Before you click away, what if I told you we found something that could change everything you thought you knew about magic? This isn't just any old book, it's a forgotten spellbook, brimming with ancient enchantments and whispering lore that has been lost for centuries. Come with us on a unique journey to unravel its secrets and find true relaxation. The chamber where we begin our tale tonight exists in that peculiar space between memory and dream, a repository hidden away from the rushing currents of the modern world. Here, in the hushed silence of a forgotten archive, beneath layers upon layers of accumulated time, there rests an object of extraordinary significance. The air itself seems different in this place, thick with the weight of centuries, carrying within it the faint scent of aged parchment, dried herbs long since turned to powder, and something else, something indefinable that speaks to the presence of forces that cannot be easily named or understood. The spellbook lies before us on a table worn smooth by countless years of use, its surface marked with the ghostly impressions of objects long since removed. The book itself appears almost as if it has grown from the darkness surrounding it, its presence commanding attention despite, or perhaps because of, its obvious age. The cover, fashioned from leather that might once have been supple and rich in colour, has transformed over the passage of time into something altogether different. The surface has darkened to the deep brown of ancient oak bark, with undertones that shift between amber and shadow depending on how the light catches its weathered face. Running your fingers across this cover would reveal a landscape of texture, a topography created by the patient work of time itself. There are places where the leather has become almost smooth, polished by the touch of hands that held this volume perhaps hundreds of years ago, hands belonging to someone whose name and face have been erased from living memory. In other places, the surface has cracked and split, forming intricate patterns that resemble nothing so much as the dry beds of ancient rivers, or the delicate branching of lightning captured and frozen in a moment of impossible stillness. These cracks run deep, revealing glimpses of the layers beneath, showing how this book has been constructed, built up from multiple elements bound together with craft and intention. The clasps that hold the book closed are works of art in themselves, though time has not been kind to them. Fashioned from what appears to be bronze, or perhaps an alloy whose exact composition has been lost to history, they have acquired that particular patina that speaks of great age. The metal has darkened and greened in places, oxidized by exposure to air and moisture over countless seasons. Yet despite their obvious age, these clasps remain functional, their mechanism still sound, still capable of performing the task for which they were created so long ago. They are shaped in a manner that suggests both utility and symbolism, their forms incorporating elements that might be protective wards, or perhaps simply decorative flourishes meant to mark this book as something special, something worthy of such elaborate fastenings. Around the edges of the cover, there runs a border of what might once have been gilding, though now only the faintest traces remain, caught in the tiny crevices and protected hollows of the leather's surface. This gold, if indeed that is what it once was, has dulled to a colour somewhere between ochre and rust, yet it still manages to catch what little light reaches into this quiet space, creating tiny points of gleam that draw the eye and hint at the splendour this volume might have possessed when it was new, when it first left the hands of whatever artisan crafted its physical form. The spine of the book tells its own story, one of use and survival. It has cracked and split in places where the binding has been stressed by repeated openings, yet it has not broken entirely. The threads that hold the pages together, visible in the gaps that have formed, appear to be made of something more durable than common string, perhaps sinew or specially treated fibre, chosen specifically for its ability to endure. These threads have darkened with age, but they remain intact, a testament to the skill of whoever bound this book together, whoever understood that what was being preserved within these pages needed to survive not just years, but generations, perhaps even centuries. There is a quality to this book that transcends its physical presence, an atmosphere that seems to emanate from it like heat from a stone that has been sitting in the sun, even closed, even silent and still as it has been for who knows how long. It seems to carry with it a suggestion of potential, of energies contained and waiting. This is not merely a collection of pages bound between covers. This is a vessel, a container designed to hold something far more significant than mere words and illustrations. This is a repository of knowledge that was meant to be preserved, protected, and passed down through time. The dust that has settled upon the book's surface is not merely the ordinary accumulation that gathers on forgotten objects. It possesses an unusual quality, almost like fine ash or powder, that has been sifted through cloth multiple times until only the finest particles remain. This dust is not uniform in colour, but varies in subtle shades ranging from pale grey to something closer to silver with occasional glints that might be tricks of the light or might be something else entirely. When disturbed, this dust does not simply scatter and fall as ordinary dust might. Instead, it seems to hang in the air for a moment longer than it should, catching the light in ways that create brief patterns, almost like letters or symbols, before finally settling back down or dispersing into the surrounding air. The table upon which the book rests bears the marks of its long tenure as guardian to this artifact. There are stains whose origins can only be guessed at, circular marks that might have come from cups or vessels, set down by previous custodians, irregular patches where something might have been spilled and never fully cleaned away. There are also marks that appear to have been carved or scratched into the wood, some of which might be deliberate inscriptions, protective symbols perhaps, meant to ward the book or the space around it, while others seem to be the result of nothing more significant than the passage of time and the small accidents that accumulate over years of use and neglect. The lighting in this space is deliberately subdued, kept low not merely for atmosphere but out of practical concern for the preservation of ancient materials. What light exists comes from sources that have been carefully positioned to avoid direct exposure to the book while still providing enough illumination to make examination possible. This creates an interplay of light and shadow across the book's surface that seems to enhance its mysterious nature, causing certain details to emerge from the darkness while allowing others to recede, creating a visual experience that changes depending on the angle from which the book is viewed. As we stand here in this moment of anticipation, before the clasps have been undone and the cover lifted, there is time to consider what we are about to do. The act of opening a book that has lain closed for so long is not without significance. In a very real sense, we are about to disturb a rest that has lasted longer than most human lives, longer perhaps than some civilizations. We are about to allow air and light to touch pages that have been sealed away in darkness, protected from the elements and from the corrupting influence of time's steady march. We are about to become, in effect, the first new witnesses to whatever is contained within these pages in potentially hundreds of years. The responsibility of this moment should not be taken lightly. Books of this nature, texts that contain knowledge of magical practices, arcane lore and forgotten wisdom, were not created casually or without purpose. They were the life's work of individuals who dedicated themselves to understanding forces that most people never even acknowledge existed. They represent countless hours of study, experimentation, success and failure. They are the distilled essence of experience and insight, preserved in physical form so that others might learn, might benefit, might continue the work that was begun so long ago. The very fact that this book has survived at all is remarkable. Throughout history, such books have been targets of destruction, burned by those who feared what they represented, confiscated by authorities who sought to control access to knowledge they deemed dangerous, lost in disasters both natural and man-made, or simply allowed to decay through neglect and the ravages of time. That this particular volume has endured suggests either remarkable luck or perhaps something more, some quality of protection or preservation that goes beyond the merely physical. The thickness of the book suggests a substantial number of pages within, each one potentially containing information that exists nowhere else in the world. The weight of it, were one to lift it, would be considerable, not merely from the physical mass of paper and binding, but from the accumulated significance of everything it represents. This is not light reading meant for casual entertainment. This is serious work, the kind of text that demands attention, respect and careful study. Around the edges of the cover, where the leather meets the pages, there are visible signs of wear that speak to how this book was used in its active life. Certain areas show more damage than others, suggesting places where hands frequently gripped the volume, where it was opened and closed, carried and consulted. These patterns of wear can tell us something about how the book's previous owner or owners interacted with it, which sections might have been referenced more frequently, which spells or passages were returned to again and again. The silence in this space is profound, the kind of quiet that seems to have depth and presence of its own. It is the silence of libraries and archives, of places where knowledge is stored and protected, where the voices of the past wait patiently to be heard again. In this silence, even the smallest sound becomes significant. The faint creak of old wood, the whisper of fabric as clothing shifts, the sound of breathing that seems almost too loud in this reverent space. This silence is not empty, but full, pregnant with possibility and the weight of anticipation. The temperature in this room is carefully controlled, kept at a level that helps preserve old books and documents, cool enough to slow the processes of decay, but not so cold as to make the materials brittle. This controlled environment has likely played a role in this book's survival, providing conditions that favour preservation over deterioration. Yet even with such care, time cannot be entirely stopped, only slowed, and the evidence of its passage is written clearly across every surface of this ancient volume. There is a protocol to approaching objects of this significance, a series of considerations and precautions that must be observed. Hands that will touch this book must be clean and dry, free from oils and residues that might transfer to the delicate materials. The space must be prepared, cleared of anything that might cause damage, with soft surfaces ready to receive the book should it need to be turned or repositioned. Tools may be required, thin implements that can help separate pages that might have adhered to one another over time without causing tears or damage. Every action must be deliberate, considered, executed with care and attention. As we prepare to finally open this book, to release the clasps and lift the cover, there is a moment of pause, a final instant to appreciate this threshold we are about to cross. Once opened, the book will no longer be quite the same sealed mystery it has been. Knowledge of its contents will begin to spread, moving from the private darkness of its closed pages into the shared light of discovery. This is both loss and gain, the ending of one state and the beginning of another. It is a transformation that cannot be undone, a crossing of boundaries that changes both the book and those who encounter it. The weight of history presses down upon this moment. The accumulated significance of all the years this book has existed, all the hands that have held it before, all the eyes that have scanned its pages, all the minds that have pondered its mysteries and attempted to understand its teachings. We are about to join that chain of seekers and scholars, to become part of the book's ongoing story, to add our moment to its long chronology of discovery and revelation. Before we disturb the ancient clasps and peer within, there is much to learn from the book's outer surface, for those who created such volumes understood that the exterior itself could carry meaning, could serve as more than mere protection for the pages within. The cover of a spell book was often the first test, the initial barrier that separated the casual observer from the serious seeker. It could contain warnings, invitations, protections and promises, all encoded in the symbols and decorations that adorned its surface. Looking more closely at the cover, patterns begin to emerge from what might at first appear to be mere decorative elements or the random marks of age and wear. There are symbols here, deliberately placed and carefully crafted, though their meanings have become obscured by time and the accumulation of damage. Some of these symbols are barely visible, so faint that they might be missed entirely except under the most careful examination. Others are more prominent, raised from the leather surface as if they had been tooled or embossed into the material when it was still fresh and pliable. Near the centre of the cover there appears to be a primary symbol, larger than the others and positioned in a place of obvious importance. Its form is complex, composed of multiple elements that interweave and connect in ways that suggest deep significance. There are curves that might represent celestial bodies, perhaps the moon in its various phases, or the sun in its daily journey across the sky. There are straight lines that intersect at precise angles, creating geometric shapes whose proportions might not be accidental, but rather calculated according to mathematical or mystical principles that were important to whoever designed this emblem. Within this central symbol, there are smaller details, tiny marks and flourishes that add layers of meaning to the overall design. Some of these might be letters or characters from an alphabet that is no longer commonly used, or perhaps from a system of notation unique to magical practice, a symbolic language developed specifically for recording arcane knowledge. Other details might be more pictographic in nature, tiny images that represent concepts or entities, serving as a kind of visual shorthand for ideas that would require many words to express fully in common language. Around the periphery of the cover, arranged in a pattern that seems deliberate, despite the damage that has occurred over time, there are additional symbols, smaller than the central device but no less carefully executed. These appear to form a sequence, or progression, as if they are meant to be read in a certain order, following a path around the book's exterior. Some of these peripheral symbols echo elements found in the central design, creating visual connections that might reflect conceptual or functional relationships. Others are unique, introducing new elements into the overall composition. The style of these symbols provides clues about their origins and the tradition from which they emerged. Some elements suggest influences from classical magical systems, bearing resemblance to symbols found in grimoires and texts from medieval Europe, where learned men and women sought to systematize their understanding of supernatural forces and codify methods for working with them. Other elements seem to draw from older sources, perhaps pre-Christian traditions that reach back to the beliefs and practices of ancient peoples who saw the world as alive with spirits and powers that could be approached, negotiated with, and sometimes commanded through proper knowledge and technique. There are also elements that suggest connections to alchemical philosophy, that peculiar blend of photoscience and mysticism that sought to understand the fundamental nature of matter and transformation. Certain geometric shapes and arrangements call to mind the symbolic representations used by alchemists to denote metals, planets, processes, and principles. The presence of such imagery would suggest that whoever created or owned this book saw connections between the work of magic and the work of alchemy, understanding both as different approaches to manipulating the hidden forces and structures that underlie the visible world. The colour of these symbols, where colour can still be discerned, provides additional information. Some appear to have been created using ink or paint, applied to the leather surface after the book was bound. These have faded considerably, their original vibrancy reduced to pale ghosts of what they once were. Others seem to have been made using metallic materials, perhaps gold or silver leaf, or possibly even more exotic substances. These metallic elements have oxidized and tarnished, but they still retain enough of their original character to stand out from the surrounding leather, catching what light exists and reflecting it back in muted gleams. Examining the symbols more closely reveals variations in technique and execution that might indicate they were added at different times by different hands. Some are precisely rendered, showing the work of someone with considerable skill in the decorative arts, someone who had practiced such work extensively and could execute complex designs with confidence and accuracy. Others are less refined, showing hesitations and corrections, the work of someone less experienced or perhaps working under difficult conditions without proper tools or adequate light. These variations raise intriguing questions about the book's history. Was it created by a single individual who developed their skills over time, the earlier symbols showing their initial attempts while later editions demonstrate increased mastery? Or did this book pass through multiple hands over its long life, with each successive owner adding their own marks, their own protective symbols or identifying signs? The answer might be found within the pages themselves, in variations of handwriting or changes in the style and content of the spells and notes recorded there. The leather of the cover also tells its story through the way it has aged and weathered. In some areas it has become hard and rigid, almost wooden in its inflexibility. In others it has retained more suppleness, still yielding slightly to gentle pressure. These differences might reflect variations in how the leather was originally prepared and treated, or they might result from uneven exposure to environmental factors over the centuries. Areas that were more exposed to light and air would age differently than those that were protected or pressed against other surfaces. There are stains on the cover whose origins can only be guessed at. Some might be simple water damage, the result of exposure to moisture at some point in the book's history. Others have more unusual characteristics, colours that suggest they might have come from something other than ordinary water. Could they be the residue of potions or magical preparations that were spilled during use? Might they be ink from notes that were made on the cover itself and later cleaned away? Or could they represent something more deliberate? The application of protective substances meant to ward the book against harm or unwanted attention. Near the spine, there are marks that appear to be burns, small areas where the leather has been discoloured and slightly damaged by exposure to heat. These burns are not severe enough to suggest the book was ever in danger of being consumed by fire, but they speak to proximity to flames, perhaps from candles or lamps used to provide light during nighttime study. The positioning of these marks might tell us something about how the book was typically positioned when in use, which side faced toward the light source most frequently. The clasps deserve closer examination, for they are not merely functional objects, but potentially significant symbolic elements as well. The design incorporates motifs that might have meaning beyond the merely decorative. The shape they form when closed could be interpreted as a symbol in itself, perhaps representing the concept of binding or sealing, of containing something that should not be casually released. The patina that has formed on the metal has created patterns that almost seem to show faces or figures, though this might be nothing more than the human tendency to find familiar shapes in random configurations, a phenomenon known as pareidolia. The mechanism of the clasps is remarkably sophisticated for an object of such age. It operates not through simple hooks or catches, but through a more complex system that requires a specific sequence of movements to open properly. This might have been a security feature, designed to prevent unauthorized access by making the book difficult to open for anyone who did not know the trick of its clasps. Or it might have served a symbolic purpose, requiring anyone who would read the book to demonstrate patience and careful attention from the very beginning, establishing the proper mindset before even reaching the first page. Running along the very edges of the cover, almost at the limit of visibility, there appear to be tiny marks that might be writing. If these are indeed letters or words, they are incredibly small, requiring close examination to make out any details at all. The script, if that is what it is, does not appear to be in any language that is immediately recognizable. The characters have an unusual quality, angular in some places and flowing in others, sometimes seeming to shift between different styles within the same word or phrase. This might be an example of a magical alphabet, one of those systems of writing that were sometimes developed specifically for recording esoteric knowledge, designed to be difficult for the uninitiated to read even if they managed to access the physical text. The spine of the book, that narrow edge where all the pages come together, shows evidence of repair work that must have been carried out at some point in the volume's history. Strips of material have been added to reinforce areas where the binding was beginning to fail, applied with an adhesive that has yellowed with age but still holds fast. These repairs were done with care, by someone who understood the value of what they were preserving and had the skill to perform the necessary work without causing further damage. The fact that such repairs were made at all suggests that there were times when this book was considered important enough to warrant the expense and effort of conservation, periods when it was still actively valued, rather than simply forgotten and left to decay. Looking at the book from different angles reveals how light plays across its surface, highlighting certain features while obscuring others. The three-dimensional quality of the embossed symbols becomes more apparent when viewed at a shallow angle, their raised surfaces catching light while the recessed areas fall into shadow. This interplay of light and dark creates an almost animated effect, as if the symbols are moving or shifting as one's perspective changes. It is not difficult to imagine how such visual effects might have seemed mysterious or even magical to those who encountered the book by candlelight or lamplight, the flickering flames creating constantly changing patterns of illumination and shadow. The overall impression created by all these elements is one of deliberate mystique, of careful construction meant to inspire both respect and curiosity. This is not a book that was intended to be approachable or casual in its presentation. Everything about its external appearance suggests that what lies within should be taken seriously, that the knowledge contained in these pages is not trivial entertainment, but profound wisdom that deserves careful study and consideration. The cover serves as both guardian and advertisement, protecting the contents while simultaneously hinting at their significance, creating a barrier that only the truly dedicated would attempt to cross. The moment has arrived to disturb the ancient clasps, to release the mechanisms that have held this book closed for so very long. The first clasp opens with surprising ease, its mechanism still functional despite the centuries that have passed since it was last operated. There is a soft click as it releases, a sound that seems loud in the profound silence of this space. The second clasp proves more reluctant, requiring gentle persuasion and careful manipulation before it finally gives way with a faint protest of aged metal. With both clasps released, the book rests in a new state of potential, no longer sealed but not yet open, waiting for that final deliberate action that will expose its contents to light and air once more. The cover lifts slowly, resisting slightly as if reluctant to abandon the position it has maintained for so long. There is a faint creaking sound, the protest of old leather and binding materials being flexed after a long period of immobility. The inside of the cover reveals itself gradually, and even before the pages themselves become visible, there are discoveries to be made here on this interior surface. The inside cover has been used as a space for notes and inscriptions, added at various times by various hands. Some of these notes are written in a clear, careful script that speaks of someone taking their time, recording information they considered important enough to preserve in this prominent location. Other entries are more hurried, hasty jottings that capture thoughts or observations in the moment without concern for elegance or permanence. There are dates here, though they are recorded in formats that require interpretation, using systems of reckoning that might not immediately correspond to modern calendrical conventions. One inscription near the top of the inside cover appears to be a kind of bookplate or ownership mark, declaring that this volume belongs to or was created by someone whose name has become partially illegible over time. The letters that remain visible suggest a name that sounds vaguely Germanic or perhaps Scandinavian in origin, though the exact reading is uncertain. Below this primary inscription there are other names or initials, perhaps marking the passage of the book through successive owners, each one adding their mark to document their custodianship of this important artifact. There are also what appear to be protective inscriptions, short phrases or invocations written in Latin, or perhaps in languages derived from Latin. These might be prayers asking for divine protection of the book and its contents, or they could be magical formulas designed to ward against theft, damage, or misuse. The presence of such protective language reinforces the sense that those who possessed this book understood it to be valuable and worthy of special safeguarding. As the cover continues to open and the first actual pages of the book begin to be revealed, the quality of the materials becomes immediately apparent. The paper, or rather parchment, for these are clearly pages made from treated animal hide rather than plant-based paper, has a warm, creamy colour that has aged remarkably well. There is minimal discoloration, no severe brittleness or damage that would prevent the pages from being turned and examined. This excellent state of preservation speaks to both the quality of the original materials and the relatively good conditions in which the book has been stored over the centuries. The first page that becomes fully visible is not covered in text, but rather serves as a kind of frontispiece or title page. It bears a single large symbol, executed with extraordinary skill and precision. This symbol shares elements with the designs on the cover, but is even more elaborate, incorporating additional details and flourishes that make it a work of art in its own right. The symbol has been rendered using multiple colours of ink, with black forming the primary outlines and structure, while touches of red, blue, and what might once have been gold add emphasis and dimensionality. Around the edges of this symbol there are decorative elements that might be purely ornamental or might carry their own meanings. There are vines and leaves, rendered with botanical accuracy, that suggest the artist had studied plants carefully and could reproduce their forms from memory or observation. Interspersed among these natural elements are creatures both real and fantastic. There is what appears to be a serpent or dragon, its sinuous form weaving through the composition. There are birds that might be ravens or crows, species often associated with magic and prophecy in many traditions. There are other creatures whose forms are less easily identified, chimeras that combine features of multiple animals into impossible but striking hybrids. The craftsmanship evident in this first page sets a standard for what is to come, establishing that whoever created this book was not merely recording information but was engaged in the creation of an object that would be beautiful as well as functional, worthy of admiration for its aesthetic qualities as well as its practical utility. This attention to artistic detail might seem surprising in a working document, but it reflects a sensibility that saw no contradiction between usefulness and beauty, that understood the creation of a book as an act that deserved to be performed with care and skill. Turning past this initial page reveals the true beginning of the book's textual content. The first words are written in a script that flows across the page with confidence and authority, the hand of someone well practiced in the art of writing, someone for whom the formation of letters had become so automatic that they could focus their attention on the content rather than the mechanics of recording it. The script is what might be termed a Gothic hand, with tall narrow letters and elaborate flourishes on certain characters, particularly those that begin lines or mark the start of new sections. The language itself presents an immediate challenge, for while the alphabet used is recognisable, being based on Latin characters, the actual words do not immediately resolve into any modern language. This is clearly an older form of speech, perhaps an archaic version of a language that still exists in evolved form today, or possibly a language that has fallen out of use entirely, surviving only in written records like this one. There are words that seem almost familiar, that echo terms found in modern English, German, or the Romance languages, but the overall structure and vocabulary remain tantalizingly out of reach without specialized knowledge or careful study. The first readable phrase, or at least the first phrase whose general sense can be grasped through careful examination and educated guessing, appears to be a statement of purpose or intention. It speaks of gathering wisdom, of collecting and preserving knowledge that would otherwise be lost, of creating a record that will outlast the mortal span of its creator. There is a sense of urgency to these opening words, a recognition that time is limited and that important knowledge is always at risk of disappearing unless conscious effort is made to preserve it. Following this introduction, the text begins to organize itself into distinct sections. The first major, Division appears to be concerned with foundational concepts, the basic principles and theories upon which the later practical work will be based. This is a common structure in magical texts, which often begin with cosmological or philosophical discussions before proceeding to specific techniques and procedures. The reasoning behind this approach is that magic, properly understood, is not merely a collection of disconnected tricks and rituals, but rather a systematic approach to engaging with fundamental forces and structures of reality. To work magic effectively, one must first understand the nature of the world and one's place within it. The pages devoted to these foundational discussions are densely written, with margins that have been filled with additional notes and commentary, either by the original author returning to add further thoughts, or by later readers recording their own insights and interpretations. Some of these marginalia are written in the same hand as the main text, while others are clearly different, showing variations in script style, ink colour, and even language. The presence of these readers' notes adds another layer of interest to the book, for they provide glimpses into how the text was understood and used by those who studied it over the centuries. Among the early pages, there are also the first illustrations, diagrams that help explain concepts that would be difficult to convey through words alone. One of these diagrams shows what appears to be a cosmological model, a representation of how the universe is structured according to the magical philosophy underlying this book. There are concentric circles representing different levels or planes of existence, with the material world shown as the outermost layer, and more subtle or spiritual realms depicted as inner circles, approaching a central point that might represent ultimate reality or divine source. Lines connect different levels, showing how influences can flow between planes, how actions in one realm can affect conditions in another. Another early diagram depicts the human body, but not as it would appear in an anatomical text. Instead, this representation shows the body as a map of energy channels and power centers, locations where spiritual or magical forces concentrate and can be accessed through proper technique. This is a common feature of many magical systems, which often posit that the physical body is interpenetrated by more subtle bodies or energy structures that are not visible to ordinary sight, but are nonetheless real and can be worked with through training and practice. The quality of these illustrations matches that of the initial frontispiece, showing the same attention to detail and artistic skill. The drawings are not crude sketches, but carefully executed images that manage to be both technically informative and visually pleasing. Colours have been used sparingly but effectively, applied in specific areas to highlight important features or create visual emphasis. Where the original artist used gold ink or paint, the material has largely retained its luster, still catching light and adding touches of brilliance to the pages. As we move deeper into these opening sections, the handwriting occasionally shows variations that might indicate changes in the author's physical or emotional state while writing. Some passages are executed with perfect consistency and control, every letter formed with precision. Other sections show more variation, with letters that are slightly less regular, ink that varies in density, as if the pen had been pressed harder or lighter against the page, or spacing that is less even. These variations are the traces of the human being behind the text, reminders that this book was created by someone who experienced fatigue, excitement, distraction, and focus just as we do. There are also occasional blots and smudges, small imperfections in the text that would have been nearly impossible to avoid given the tools and materials available when this book was created. Some of these marks have been incorporated into the design of the page, transformed from errors into decorative elements through the addition of small flourishes or extensions that turn them into intentional features. This practical approach to inevitable mistakes speaks to the experience and pragmatism of the book's creator, someone who understood that perfect execution is rarely achievable, and that the important thing is to produce a useful document, not a flawless one. The text of these opening pages establishes terminology and concepts that will be used throughout the rest of the book, defining key terms and explaining how they will be employed in later discussions. There are words here that appear repeatedly, terms that clearly hold special significance within the magical system being presented. Some of these terms are recognizable as variations of words still used in modern discussions of magic and mysticism, while others are more obscure, possibly unique to the tradition documented in this particular text. One passage that can be partially understood speaks of the relationship between word and will, explaining how spoken or written language can serve as a vehicle for intention, a way of shaping and directing the mind's power towards specific ends. This is a fundamental concept in many magical traditions, the idea that words are not merely descriptive labels, but active forces that can influence reality when used with proper knowledge and technique. The passage elaborates on this theme, discussing how different languages and even different scripts might have varying degrees of effectiveness for magical work, how the sounds of words and the shapes of letters can resonate with or reflect deeper patterns in the structure of reality. Another early section addresses the question of ethical considerations in magical practice, acknowledging that the powers described in this book could potentially be used in ways that cause harm. The author's position seems to be that magic itself is neutral, a tool that can be applied toward good or ill ends depending on the intention and character of the practitioner. There are warnings here about the consequences of misusing magical knowledge, suggestions that actions taken through magic carry particular weight, and that those who work such arts must be prepared to accept responsibility for their effects. These ethical discussions are interwoven with more practical considerations about the requirements for successful magical work. There is emphasis on the importance of preparation, both mental and physical. The practitioner is advised to approach magical operations in a state of cleanliness and calm, having taken time to clarify their intentions and free themselves from distracting thoughts and emotions. There are suggestions about dietary practices that might enhance one's capacity for magical work, recommendations about times of day or phases of the moon that are particularly asked for certain operations, and advice about the value of regular practice and discipline in developing one's abilities. The overall impression created by these opening sections is one of a comprehensive and systematic approach to magic, a tradition that has been thought through carefully and organized in a way that allows knowledge to be transmitted effectively from teacher to student or from text to reader. This is not a haphazard collection of random spells and recipes, but rather a coherent system with its own internal logic and philosophy, built on foundational principles that are explained before practical applications are introduced. As we move beyond the introductory materials and deeper into the body of the text, the character of the book begins to shift from a philosophical discussion to practical instruction. This is where the actual spells and rituals are recorded, the specific procedures through which the principles described earlier are to be applied in concrete situations. The transition is marked by a change in how the pages are organized, with the dense paragraphs of the opening sections giving way to more structured presentations that clearly delineate individual magical operations. Each spell or enchantment is typically introduced with a title or heading that indicates its purpose or the effect it is designed to produce. These headings are rendered in a larger script than the body text, often with decorative flourishes or illuminated letters that make them stand out clearly on the page. The titles themselves are evocative, speaking of purposes both practical and mystical. There are spells for protection and healing, for gaining knowledge or enhancing perception, for influencing the weather or communicating across distances, for binding and loosing, for revealing and concealing. One of the first detailed spells encountered in this section is titled, in translation, something like the Charm of Safe Passage. The purpose of this enchantment is to protect a traveller on a dangerous journey, warding them against mishap, violence, or becoming lost. The instructions begin with a list of required materials, items that must be gathered before the spell can be performed. Some of these materials are relatively common and easily obtained, herbs that would have grown wild in the countryside or could be cultivated in a garden, water from a particular type of source, salt that has been specially blessed or prepared. Other required items are more unusual: a stone that has never been touched by sunlight, a feather from a bird that died of natural causes, thread spun by a person of specific characteristics. The spell instructions then proceed through a series of steps that must be carried out in precise order. There is emphasis on the importance of timing, with specific recommendations about when the spell should be begun based on celestial considerations, the phase of the moon, or the position of certain stars. The practitioner is instructed to prepare a physical talisman, combining the gathered materials in a specific way while speaking particular words of power. These words are provided in what appears to be an ancient language, with pronunciation guides written in smaller script alongside the main text to help ensure correct vocalization. The instructions include not just the external actions to be performed, but also guidance about the mental and emotional state the practitioner should maintain throughout the process. There are directions to visualize specific images or to focus attention in particular ways, techniques for maintaining concentration and excluding distracting thoughts. The spell is not merely a mechanical procedure, but requires active participation of the will and imagination, engagement of the whole person in the work being performed. Following the main instructions, there are often additional notes and observations, material that appears to be drawn from the experience of actually performing the spell. These notes might discuss variations in how the spell can be adapted for different circumstances, warnings about common mistakes that should be avoided, or reports of particularly successful or unsuccessful attempts at working the magic. In some cases, there are marginal annotations that appear to have been added by readers who tried the spell themselves and wanted to record their own results and observations. The next spell in the sequence addresses a very different concern. This enchantment is designed to enhance the growth of plants, to ensure good harvests and protect crops from disease and pests. The agricultural focus of this magic speaks to the historical context in which the book was created, a time when the success or failure of crops could mean the difference between prosperity and starvation, when people had direct relationships with the land and understood the profound importance of the growing season. This agricultural spell is more elaborate than the previous one, requiring preparation that must begin well before the actual planting season. There are instructions for preparing the soil through both physical means and magical blessing, for treating seeds with specific solutions and speaking words of encouragement over them, for establishing protective boundaries around fields, using materials that have been enchanted for this purpose. The spell reflects a worldview in which the boundary between natural and supernatural is permeable, where magical and mundane techniques can be combined in pursuit of practical goals. The illustrations accompanying this spell show the layout of fields and the positioning of protective markers at their corners and boundaries. There are diagrams of the phases of plant growth, each stage associated with particular activities or blessings that should be performed to support the crop's development. The attention to botanical detail in these drawings suggests genuine observation and understanding of agricultural processes, knowledge that is being integrated with magical practice rather than replaced by it. As we continue through the pages, we encounter spells for healing various ailments and injuries. These are among the most detailed entries in the book, reflecting the obvious importance of health and the desperate need people have always had for effective treatments when faced with illness or hurt. The healing spells are organized by the type of condition they address, with separate sections for fevers, wounds, diseases of specific organs or systems, afflictions believed to be caused by spiritual influences, and injuries resulting from accidents or violence. One particularly intricate healing spell is designed to treat a condition that the text describes as a wasting sickness, perhaps referring to what we might now understand as a chronic degenerative disease. The treatment prescribed is complex, involving the preparation of multiple remedies that must be administered in sequence over an extended period. Some of these remedies are herbal preparations, detailed recipes for teas, poultices, and salves made from plants whose medicinal properties are described in accompanying notes. Other elements of the treatment are purely magical, involving the creation of talismans that the patient should wear, words that should be spoken over them at specific times, and rituals that family members should perform on their behalf. The healing section of the book reveals a sophisticated understanding of how physical, mental and spiritual factors interact in health and disease. There is recognition that some conditions have primarily physical causes and require physical remedies, while others originate in disturbances of the spirit or emotions and must be addressed through means that work on those levels. Many treatments combine approaches, acknowledging that healing is most effective when it addresses the whole person, rather than merely treating symptoms in isolation, interspersed. Among the healing spells are preventative charms, magical operations designed to protect against illness before it occurs. These preventative measures often involve the creation of amulets or talismans that should be carried or worn, objects that have been empowered through ritual to serve as shields against disease. The instructions for creating such protective objects are detailed, specifying not only the materials to be used and the procedures to be followed, but also the mindset and intention that should be maintained by the person doing the work. Moving beyond health and healing, we encounter sections devoted to divination and the gaining of knowledge through supernatural means. These spells and procedures represent attempts to access information that is not available through ordinary sensory observation, to see beyond the limits of normal human perception. The methods described are varied, drawing on multiple traditions and approaches to achieving expanded awareness. One divination technique involves the use of reflective surfaces, mirrors or bowls of water or other liquids, which are to be gazed into while in a state of focused concentration. The instructions describe how to prepare such a seeing surface, what conditions are most favourable for scrying, and what signs and symbols might appear in the mirror or water and what they might signify. There are warnings about the dangers of this practice, suggestions that not everything perceived through scrying should be trusted without verification, and advice about maintaining protective measures while engaging in work that opens one to influences from beyond the ordinary world. Another divination method involves the casting and interpretation of objects, small items that are thrown and then read according to how they fall and what patterns they form. The objects used might be stones marked with particular symbols, pieces of bone or wood that have been prepared for this purpose, or other small items that have been selected and consecrated for use in this practice. The text provides extensive guidance on how to interpret the various configurations that might result from casting, with different patterns corresponding to different types of information or predictions about future events. There are also techniques for inducing prophetic dreams, methods for preparing oneself to receive visions during sleep that might provide guidance or warning about matters of importance. These methods typically involve specific preparations before retiring to sleep, the use of certain herbs that are believed to enhance dreaming or make dreams more memorable and interpretable, and the placement of particular objects near the sleeping area to influence the nature of the dreams that will come. Upon waking, the dreamer is instructed to immediately record whatever they can remember of their nocturnal visions, as dreams fade quickly and details that might be significant can be lost if not captured promptly. The book also contains spells related to love and relationships, though these are approached with more caution and qualification than some of the other types of magic described. The author seems aware of the ethical complexities involved in magic that attempts to influence another person's feelings or choices, and there are repeated warnings about the dangers of using such spells irresponsibly. The love magic presented here is generally framed not as compulsion, but as enhancement of existing attraction or removal of obstacles that prevent natural affection from developing. One spell in this category is designed to help someone become more appealing and attractive to others in general, enhancing their personal magnetism and social ease rather than targeting a specific individual. The procedure involves a combination of personal grooming with the use of specially prepared oils and perfumes, the wearing of colours and styles that have been selected through magical consultation, and the recitation of charms that are meant to boost confidence and project an aura of attractiveness. This is magic that works as much through its psychological effects on the practitioner as through any direct supernatural influence, building genuine confidence and self-assurance that naturally make a person more appealing to others. There are also spells for protecting relationships from external interference or internal discord, magical operations designed to strengthen bonds between people and help them weather the challenges that any long-term connection inevitably faces. These protective relationship spells often involve the creation of joint talismans that couples should keep, objects that symbolize their union and serve as focal points for their commitment to each other. The creation of such talismans is described as work that should be done together, a collaborative, magical operation that becomes itself an act of bonding. As we venture further into the book, we encounter sections devoted to weather magic, spells and rituals designed to influence meteorological conditions. This is one of the oldest and most widespread forms of magic found across human cultures, reflecting the profound importance of weather for agricultural societies and the relative powerlessness people traditionally felt in the face of natural forces that could mean the difference between abundance and famine. The weather magic in this book is notably cautious and measured in its claims. Rather than promising complete control over atmospheric conditions, the spells are generally presented as ways to encourage favourable weather or mitigate the worst effects of storms and droughts. There is recognition that weather is a vast and complex system, not easily dominated by human will, and that attempts to force dramatic changes can have unintended consequences. The recommended approach is to work in harmony with existing weather patterns, gently nudging conditions in beneficial directions rather than attempting wholesale transformation. One spell for encouraging rain during dry periods involves the preparation of a ritual space near a body of water, where the practitioner performs actions and recites words designed to appeal to the spirits or forces associated with clouds and precipitation. The spell includes instructions for creating sympathetic connections between the ritualist and the desired outcome, using symbolic actions like pouring water in specific patterns or burning incense that creates clouds of smoke meant to represent and attract storm clouds. The timing of such weather magic is considered crucial, with certain atmospheric conditions being more susceptible to magical influence than others. Conversely, there are spells for calming storms or protecting specific areas from the worst effects of severe weather. These protective weather spells often involve the establishment of boundaries around the area to be shielded, using physical markers that have been magically charged for this purpose. The practitioner is instructed to walk the boundary line while performing specific actions and speaking words of protection, creating what is essentially a magical barrier that is meant to deflect or diminish the force of storms that approach. Among the most visually striking pages in the book are those devoted to summoning and communication with spiritual entities. These sections are elaborately illustrated with images of the beings that might be called upon, creatures and intelligences that exist in realms beyond ordinary human perception. Some of these entities are depicted in forms that are recognizably human-like, figures that might be angels or saints or other benevolent spiritual beings. Others are shown as more abstract or symbolic forms, geometric patterns or combinations of symbols that represent the essential nature of entities that cannot be captured in purely pictorial representation. The procedures for summoning and communicating with such entities are among the most complex and demanding in the entire book. They require extensive preparation, including periods of fasting and purification, the gathering of rare materials for creating protective circles and summoning devices, and the learning of specific linguistic formulas that must be pronounced with perfect accuracy. There is great emphasis on the importance of protection when engaging in this type of work. Repeated warnings that contact with spiritual entities can be dangerous if proper precautions are not observed. The text provides detailed instructions for creating protective circles, spaces within which the practitioner can work while being shielded from harmful influences. These circles are not merely drawn on the ground but are constructed through a combination of physical marking, verbal formula, and visualization, creating boundaries that exist on multiple levels of reality simultaneously. Within the safety of such a circle, the magician can then perform the specific invocations and actions required to call forth the entity they wish to contact. What follows in these sections are the actual summoning formulas, the words and names that are to be spoken to establish communication with specific entities. These formulas are written in multiple languages, sometimes within the same invocation, drawing on Hebrew, Greek, Latin, and other tongues considered to have particular power for magical work. The pronunciation of these words is critical, and the text includes marks and notations to guide proper vocalization, along with warnings about the consequences of mispronunciation or incomplete recitation of the formulas. Once contact has been established with a spiritual entity, the text provides guidance on how to communicate effectively, how to ask questions or make requests in ways that are most likely to receive favourable responses. There is discussion of the hierarchies and relationships that exist among different types of entities, knowledge of which can be useful in determining which beings might be most appropriate to approach for particular types of assistance. The text also addresses how to properly dismiss entities once the work is complete, ensuring that they return to their own realms, rather than lingering in ways that might cause problems. Among the most intriguing entries in the book are those that deal with transformation and shape-shifting, magical operations through which the practitioner might temporarily alter their physical form or cause such alterations in others. These spells are presented with particular gravity, acknowledged as advanced and potentially dangerous work that should not be attempted lightly. The transformations described range from relatively subtle changes in appearance that might help someone avoid recognition, to more dramatic alterations that would allow the practitioner to take on the form of animals or even objects. The theoretical discussion accompanying these transformation spells explains them as working not by literally changing the physical body, which is acknowledged to be extremely difficult if not impossible, but rather by altering the perception of observers and potentially affecting the practitioner's own consciousness and behaviour to align with the form they are assuming. This is magic that operates primarily on the mental and spiritual levels, though the text suggests that with sufficient power and skill, effects can extend into the material realm as well. Scattered throughout all these sections are references to the concept of personal power or magical strength, the idea that different practitioners have different capacities for effective magical work. The text suggests that this capacity can be developed through training and practice, but also acknowledges that some individuals have natural gifts or talents that give them advantages in certain types of magical operation. There is discussion of how to recognize and cultivate one's own strengths, while compensating for areas of weakness, how to build magical power through discipline and focused intention, and how to avoid exhausting one's capacity through over-ambitious attempts at work beyond one's current level of development. The book also contains sections on the creation and consecration of magical tools, the implements that practitioners use to perform their work more effectively. These tools include items like wands and staffs, blades and cauldrons, candles and censers, each with its own specific purposes and methods of preparation. The instructions for creating such tools are remarkably detailed, specifying not only the materials to be used, but also the times when the work should be done, the words that should be spoken during the creation process, and the rituals through which finished tools should be blessed and empowered before they are put to use. One particularly beautiful section deals with the creation of magical inks and pigments, substances used for writing spells and drawing diagrams that are meant to hold enchantment. The recipes provided combine mundane ingredients, like plant extracts and mineral compounds with more mystical elements, instructions to gather materials at specific times or under particular conditions that are believed to enhance their magical properties. There are inks described for different purposes, some designed to make writing that will endure and protect what is written, others formulated to create text that will fade or become invisible after serving its purpose, still others meant to be used only for the most sacred and powerful spells. As we move through page after page of this remarkable volume, patterns begin to emerge in how the magical knowledge is organized and presented. There is a clear pedagogical structure, with simpler techniques introduced before more complex ones, foundational skills established before advanced applications. The book seems designed to serve as a complete course of instruction for someone studying magic systematically, providing everything needed to progress from basic understanding to sophisticated practice. Yet even as we discover more of what the book contains, there remains a sense that we are only scratching the surface, that the pages we have examined represent merely a portion of the wisdom preserved here. The book is thick, containing many sections we have not yet explored, promising further revelations and deeper mysteries as we continue our journey through its pages. There are hints and references throughout the text and knowledge that will be revealed in later sections, creating a sense of anticipation and progression, drawing the reader forward to discover what comes next. As our initial exploration of this remarkable spellbook draws toward its close, we find ourselves in a curious position. We have opened the volume, examined its external appearance, traced the symbols on its cover, read through its introductory sections, and sampled the variety of magical knowledge contained within its pages. Yet in many ways we have barely begun to truly understand what we have found. This book is not something that reveals itself fully in a single viewing. It is a text that demands repeated study, careful contemplation, and patient unraveling of layers of meaning that may not be immediately apparent. The question of who created this book remains largely unanswered, though we have gathered some clues along the way. The variations in handwriting suggest it might have been a collaborative work, or a volume that passed through multiple hands over time, with each custodian adding their own contributions. The dates we can partially decipher span several centuries, indicating a long history of use and transmission, but the identity of the original compiler, the person or persons who first gathered this knowledge and organized it into the form we see today, remains shrouded in mystery. We can speculate about this enigmatic enchanter based on what their book reveals. They were clearly someone of considerable learning, familiar with multiple traditions of magical practice, and able to synthesize information from diverse sources into a coherent whole. They possessed artistic skill, either personally or through collaboration with skilled illustrators, sufficient to create the beautiful diagrams and decorations that enhance the text. They had access to rare materials and esoteric knowledge, suggesting they moved in circles where such things were valued and preserved. Most intriguingly, they felt compelled to create this record, to invest the enormous time and effort required to produce such a volume, suggesting they had deep commitment to ensuring this knowledge would survive. What circumstances led to the book's abandonment and eventual forgotten status? Was it deliberately hidden away for safekeeping during a time of danger, when the possession of such materials might bring persecution? Was it simply lost through the accidents of history, misplaced during a move or separation from its owner, through death or other unforeseen circumstances? Did it languish unrecognized in some collection, where its true nature was not understood by those who inherited it? The answers to these questions might be found through careful research into the book's provenance, tracing its movements through archives and ownership records, but such investigation would itself be a lengthy undertaking. The true power of this book, whatever that might be, is not something we can fully assess based on this initial examination. The spells and procedures recorded here were clearly believed to be effective by those who wrote them down and studied them, but whether they work as described is a question that each reader must answer for themselves through study and, potentially, experimentation. Some might approach this book purely as a historical document, fascinating evidence of how people in past eras understood and attempted to engage with the world around them. Others might see it as a practical manual, instructions for techniques they intend to put into practice in their own lives. There is something deeply compelling about encountering knowledge that has been preserved from the past, teachings that have survived the passage of time to reach us across the centuries. This book represents a connection to people who lived long ago, who faced many of the same fundamental challenges and questions that we still grapple with today. They sought understanding, healing, protection and power over their circumstances, just as people continue to do in our own time. The specific methods they employed may seem strange or exotic to modern eyes, but the underlying human concerns and aspirations they express are immediately recognizable and universally relatable. What other secrets might remain hidden within these pages, in sections we have not yet examined, or passages whose meanings have not yet been fully grasped? There are portions of the text written in languages or scripts we have not been able to decipher, knowledge that remains locked away waiting for someone with the proper keys to understanding. There are diagrams whose full significance is not immediately clear, symbols whose meanings might only become apparent through extensive research or sudden insight. There are recipes and formulas that reference materials we cannot identify, requiring detective work to determine what substances the old names actually denote. The question of how this knowledge should be treated in the modern age is one that deserves careful consideration. Should books like this be sealed away, accessible only to scholars and specialists who can study them in controlled conditions? Should their contents be translated and published widely, making the knowledge they contain available to anyone interested? Should attempts be made to actually test the spells and procedures described, to determine through experiment what, if anything, they accomplish? These questions have no simple answers, and different people will reasonably come to different conclusions based on their own values and perspectives. There is value in preservation for its own sake, in ensuring that artifacts like this book continue to exist for future generations to encounter and learn from. The physical book itself is a work of considerable historical and artistic significance, regardless of whether one believes in the efficacy of the magic it describes. The knowledge contained within represents a unique window into the intellectual and spiritual life of people in past eras, providing insights that cannot be obtained from any other source. Even if approached purely as cultural history, this book deserves to be protected and studied. Yet there is also an argument for engagement rather than mere preservation, for treating this as a living document rather than a dead relic. Throughout history, magical and esoteric knowledge has been transmitted from teacher to student, from adept to apprentice, through active practice and experimentation rather than passive observation. Books like this were created to be used, to serve as guides and references for people actually engaging in magical work. To treat them only as museum pieces might be to miss something essential about their nature and purpose. The symbols and images we have encountered in our examination of this book linger in the mind, creating impressions that are not easily shaken. There is something about encountering authentic magical text that affects consciousness in subtle ways, opening doors of perception that might otherwise remain closed. Even for those who maintain skepticism about supernatural claims, exposure to systems of thought that organize reality according to different principles than those we take for granted in everyday life can be stimulating and thought-provoking, challenging assumptions and suggesting alternative ways of understanding our place in the world. What would it mean to truly unravel the secrets of this Enchanter's forgotten spellbook? Would it require years of dedicated study, learning the languages in which it is written, researching the historical and cultural context from which it emerged, tracing the sources it draws upon and the traditions it represents? Would it demand practical experimentation, actually performing the spells and rituals described to see what effects, if any, they produce? Or might the deeper secrets be of a different nature entirely, insights about the human condition or the nature of consciousness that can only be grasped through sustained contemplation and personal transformation? Perhaps the most profound mystery of all is why we are drawn to such things, what it is about books of magic and forgotten lore that captures our imagination and refuses to let go. In an age of science and technology, when so much of the world has been mapped and measured and explained, there remains something deeply appealing about the idea that there might be hidden knowledge, secret powers, ways of engaging with reality that transcend the ordinary and mundane. The possibility that reality is richer and stranger than it appears, that there are forces and intelligences beyond those acknowledged by mainstream culture, that human potential extends further than we typically imagine. These ideas exercise a powerful attraction despite, or perhaps because of, their resistance to conventional verification. This book, lying before us with its pages now exposed to light and air after so long sealed away in darkness, serves as a tangible symbol of these enduring human fascinations. It represents the perennial quest for knowledge that extends beyond the obvious and accessible, the desire to penetrate mysteries and access powers that might allow us to transcend our limitations. Whether the specific claims made in its pages are literally true, in some objective sense, matters less perhaps than the fact that people have invested enormous energy and creativity in pursuing these questions, creating elaborate systems of thought and practice in their attempts to understand and work with forces they perceived as real and significant. As we prepare to close the book once again, to return it to its resting place where it will wait for the next seeker who comes searching for what it might offer, there is a moment to reflect on what this encounter has meant. We have been privileged to glimpse knowledge that was nearly lost, to trace the thoughts of someone who lived long ago and cared enough about these matters to create this remarkable record. We have seen beauty in the carefully rendered illustrations, recognized skill in the precise execution of complex diagrams, appreciated the dedication evident in page after page of detailed instructions and observations. The book will endure, as it has endured for so long already, waiting patiently for those who come seeking what it has to offer. Its pages will be turned by other hands, its symbols studied by other eyes, its instructions pondered by other minds. Each person who encounters it will bring their own questions and perspectives, finding in it whatever they are prepared to discover. For some it will be primarily a historical curiosity, evidence of how people once thought about the world. For others it might be a practical manual, a guide to techniques they wish to master and apply. For still others it might serve as inspiration, sparking creative work or philosophical reflection that leads in directions the original authors could never have anticipated. The Enchanter who created this book could not have known that it would survive for so many centuries, that people in an age vastly different from their own would examine their work with fascination and wonder. They wrote for their own time, addressing concerns and questions that were immediate and pressing in their world, yet the care they took in creating something beautiful and comprehensive suggests they may have hoped for exactly this kind of endurance, that they were consciously creating something meant to outlast their own mortal span and speak to people they would never meet. In closing this book and stepping back from our examination of its contents, we carry away with us questions more than answers, impressions more than conclusions. We have touched something ancient and mysterious, something that connects us to a long lineage of seekers and students who have pursued knowledge of the hidden and the extraordinary. Whether we choose to believe in the literal efficacy of the magic described within these pages or approach them with scholarly detachment, we cannot help but be moved by the human stories they represent, the dedication and passion that went into their creation and preservation. The forgotten Spellbook has been, for this moment, remembered and explored. Its secrets have been partially revealed, though much remains hidden, waiting for deeper study and understanding. As you drift towards sleep, tonight, perhaps these images and ideas will follow you into your dreams, where the boundaries between possible and impossible grow thin and reality becomes more fluid and suggestive. Perhaps you will dream of ancient libraries and dusty archives, of candle-lit chambers where seekers pore over cryptic texts, of rituals performed under starlight and whispered words that shape the fabric of the world. Sleep well, dear listener, and may your dreams be filled with wonder and mystery, with glimpses of knowledge that lies just beyond the reach of waking consciousness. The secrets of the Enchanter's book will be waiting when you return, patient and eternal, ready to reveal themselves to those who approach with genuine curiosity and respect. Until we meet again to explore further mysteries, rest in the knowledge that there is always more to discover, always deeper layers of meaning waiting to be uncovered by those who seek with open hearts and inquisitive minds. Good night.